Well, my name is Ros Mitchell, and I'm now Professor Emeritus of Applied Linguistics in the Faculty of Humanities at Southampton University, where I've worked for quite a few decades. My interest in applied linguistics really, I suppose, started as a child when I was a keen language learner and wanted to study more and more and study different languages. But then I became a language teacher, and I taught Irish and French in Dublin for a few years, and became increasingly frustrated with myself as to why the learners I was teaching were not little mini-me's, really, and why they were not so keen on grammar analysis as I was. And so I really wanted to understand more of the theory of language teaching. I had met, during my teacher training, some big names. I had read some Wilga Rivers, I had read Halliday, Mackintosh and Strevens, so these were books at the time that were, in a sense, encouraging language teachers to take an interest in a more scientific view of what they were doing. And after 3 years of teaching, I wanted more of that. So I quit my job and I went to Edinburgh to do the Masters in Applied Linguistics. So that was in the late 1970s, a long time ago. But ever since, I've been captured by applied linguistics. I must have joined BAAL very soon after doing the master's degree in Edinburgh, actually, because I immediately got, rather to my surprise, a research position at the then very new University of Stirling. And so I was immediately in an academic environment. We were researching actually the transition in Scottish schools from audiolingual language teaching to a more communicative approach. So that got me interested in communicative language teaching, and all of that brought me pretty quickly to BAAL. So I imagine, I haven't rechecked, but I must have started attending BAAL conferences in the late 1970s. I'm not a founder member because, of course, BAAL began in 1967, but an early and long-standing member of BAAL, yes, indeed. As an applied linguist, I have a kind of split personality because, like many applied linguists, most of my students, including my graduate students and my doctoral students, are interested in English language teaching. But my own research interests have always remained with language teaching in Anglophone settings. So, for example, at Stirling, the project that we started out with was concerned with the teaching of French in Scottish education. I then did projects subsequently on bilingual education in Scotland, so that involves Scottish Gaelic. And really, my own personal research has always concerned this theme of the teaching of languages to the Anglophone audience. In terms of projects that I've been involved with that have potential classroom impact, I think the most important ones have been a project that we did in the 1990s, but then another one, in fact, two further projects in the 2000s, which were concerned with studying the actuality of language learning in British schools at different levels. The 1990s project was about the early secondary school, and then the 2000s projects were both concerned with the primary school. But the importance of these projects, I think, is that they both documented what students are actually learning, as opposed to what curriculum designers and so on think they should be learning. And we, for example, in the 1990s project, we focused very much on the significance of formulaic learning and rote learning, and how rote learning in the classroom can change and be a feed into more independent and creative language development. The project, we had a major project then in the 2000s, which was funded by the then Department for Children, Schools and Families, now back to its old name of the Department for Education. But there again, we visited 40 schools over 2 years and documented their classroom practices, the language learning of the children, everybody's attitudes. This was a really eye-opening project, which again succeeded, I think, in documenting very well what you can actually achieve in British conditions. So I think that those two projects have immense significance. It's interesting that the very recent document, the Modern Languages Pedagogy Review that was produced in 2016 at government request, I think, says that such research should take place. So we think we have already made a start on that kind of research and made such results available. The problem, of course, as you will be aware, is that languages policy in England in particular is incredibly stop-go, and so historic memory tends to get lost. And I mean, a very good example of that is the recent start, stop, start approach to languages in the primary school. But yes, I think that research is helpful for teachers mainly in helping them be realistic about what they can achieve and defend what they are achieving against a lot of critics who say that we should be achieving more, who don't really take account of the challenges that British teachers do face in terms of, for example, the time they have available to teach, the lack of the indifference really of the surrounding community and so on. So I think our research is important, has important implications. The difficulty at the moment, another difficulty at the moment, of course, is that the way teacher education is structured at present in England, increasingly it's an apprenticeship model where teachers are trained in a school by that particular school. And as my former student, Emma Marsden, has shown clearly in some recent publications, that makes it very difficult for teachers to get access to the kind of research-based professional knowledge that applied linguists are producing. Emma and her colleagues have done some very interesting research on how aware teachers actually are of applied linguistics research and where they get such knowledge as they do have of this research from. And at the moment, it just shows how distant the connections are between the academic activity of researchers and the actual experience of teachers in terms of their professional formation. And then, of course, the difficulty at the moment with obtaining continuing professional development for teachers. I don't think we can say that MFL is undergoing a resurgence. I think there are clearly concerns about the position of languages, and there are some attempts being made by policymakers to support languages through initiatives like, for example, the EBAC initiative, where schools get extra points, if you like, for having the maximum number of children take what are seen as academic subjects at GCSE level, including a modern foreign language. However, these initiatives have led really to, in a context where subject boundaries are very strong, where MFL is seen as a difficult subject, where it's hard to get good grades, where, again, the time allowance for languages is very short, trying to make languages a sort of academic flagship is risky. Because there are many students who will fail under those conditions. And that means that schools, again, are uneasy about languages, this subject that makes trouble because children are not getting the grades in languages that they're getting in other subjects, etc., etc. So we do have some real problems. To be more positive, I think that professionally, some of the most rewarding experiences I have had have been when I've had the opportunity to engage more directly with teachers, particularly in an action research framework. Because through master's programs, doctoral programs, and in some contexts, even engaging with local authorities and with whole schools, it has been possible to undertake classroom-based action research, which responds to the challenges and the problems that teachers actually experience, but bring some outside input from research. And that combination is very rewarding to take part in, and certainly benefits professionally greatly the teachers who take part in it. So in terms of the pluses of my career, I suppose in spite of some frustrations with the way policy has gone and the lack of attention policy has paid really to research findings, this bottom-up activity keeps many of us going, if you like. To interest language teachers in my work, I would shift tack actually here, because most recently my research has concerned higher education, and in particular we've been doing a substantial project on study abroad. But again, we have been tracking British students, that again, Anglophone students, undertaking study abroad, in our case in France, in Spain and in Mexico. And we have done a very substantial project which documented that learning experience, documented, I think, the value of that learning experience, not only linguistically, but also in terms of personal and social development, but also shows some of the limitations of the experience. And we have heaps to suggest for how study abroad programs might be better managed, particularly in terms of preparation and then follow up on return. Now, that work, again, is at the moment very relevant in terms of policy, because, of course, under Brexit conditions, Britain's participation in the Erasmus programme is by no means certain. And of course, these students that we studied were precisely beneficiaries of the Erasmus programme. So our work, on the one hand, it has policy implications because it shows very, very clearly the benefits that British young people do get from participation in Erasmus. But I think also the publication that I'm most pleased with and that I would most like people to pay attention to is the book that came from that project. It's called Anglophone Students Abroad, and it's published this year with Routledge. But why I think that book would be useful more broadly is that it's interdisciplinary. We have, linguistic chapters which track the linguistic development of the students in French and Spanish from a sort of SLA perspective. How are they getting on with, complexity, accuracy, and fluency on the one hand, but we also have more sociological, more anthropological chapters in the book which look at development of identity, development of friendship networks, and development of multilingual behaviors, if you like, when students are abroad. So I think that book, I'm excited about it because I think it shows the potential of interdisciplinary work in language education. And I think that there's something there that, most managers of language programs in British universities ought to find interesting, because in a sense there's something there for everybody. There's something about the language development that you can expect or can't expect. So some things develop better, some aspects of language develop better than others. Speaking is great, but writing really doesn't develop much, to take a basic example. But on the other hand, there is stuff there about which would interest anyone interested in broader graduate skills and employability skills, indeed, in terms of how the personal and social development that students benefit from. The relationship between linguists who think language is frightfully important and educators, policymakers and governments who think education and employability and skills are very important is never going to be straightforward, because we want to push a language agenda, and in a sense that's only a secondary issue for many education systems. I do think, though, that and it is also the case at the moment that many education systems, and very much including the British one, are quite rigidly stuck in one particular framework of a very strong subject structured curriculum with very strong barriers between subjects, very assessment-driven instruction, very strong accountability measures which limit teachers' professionalism. Now, against that background, what can applied linguists do to kind of, raise the profile of the language agenda? And I almost think we have to conduct a kind of guerrilla operation and work very bottom up, and work where we can find them with groups of teachers, educators, professionals who are interested in innovation and in diversity. And I mean, if you look across the field of British applied linguistics, you do actually find quite a lot of very positive examples of people. A number of the SIGs, for example, are working. There's the Knowledge About Language SIG, or there's I see there's a seminar coming up on cognitive linguistics in education. I mean, I think to maintain diversity in the system, these kinds of initiatives are very important at a time when At the moment, everything seems kind of frozen, but underneath, the iceberg's got to be melting or changing or something, and education is not going to look the same in 20 years' time. So therefore, we in a sense have to, the more we can cultivate relationships with educators and cultivate confidence among educators that innovation, is important, experimentation is important, risk-taking is not completely out, then the readier we will be for when, we maybe, I understand that Finland, for example, is moving right, and we're all supposed to admire Finland, aren't we? Finland is moving right away from a subject-based curriculum to a sort of integrated topic-based curriculum of the kind, Lawrence Stenhouse used to talk about in the 1970s. Well, things come around, but are we ready for that kind of change? Sooner or later, digital resources and digital practices are going to make education more individualized, for example. We can't assume that we're going to have another century of lockstep activity in face-to-face classrooms. So we have to be ready, and I feel that the more linguists can engage, as I say, not get too discouraged by what's going on at the policy level, but find local enthusiasts and find allies in different pockets of the education system, then we'll all be readier when it's time for change.